Bible. It's much fun. Oh, turn it.
Okay, so the topic of it is refuting the higher critics, and I will explain what the higher criticism of the Bible is all about. Tom knows more than me about that, but I'll try my best. We're going to talk about proofs of the Bible, and I work at a law firm, and basic cases that are obvious are called prima facie cases. I mean obvious evidence is obvious. It's not debatable, and I'm going to present to you some prima facie evidence that the Bible is true. And I begin by saying that what an honor and privilege I feel to do this. To be invited to do this. I need to say that. Anyway, perhaps you've known that it's been said that 3 out of 5 students that go to the big universities lose their faith. And some have said 70% lose their faith. I've even heard of people on TV, actually I've seen people on TV who've gone to universities, and when they came home, they threw their Bibles in the trash bin. And you got to wonder what's going on at these universities. Why are they doing that? Well, it turns out that when you go to the big secular universities, that the professors are saying that the stories in the Bible have no factual basis. They never happen, and they relegate them to fable or legends. Same thing is heard on documentary TV, science programs, history programs. They always say the legend. You go to the Central Library, they have these stories, archaeological DVDs on the Bible, and they say the biblical legend, the legend of Noah. They're always relegated to that category. Now, what is this called when they deny the Bible the factual basis? Actually, the technical term is higher criticism. But higher criticism doesn't always apply to the Bible. It's a broad term. We use it always, and Christian commentators use it as a denial of the Bible, and that's commonly used, and I'm going to use that phrase. But higher criticism refers to the science or method of determining the factual accuracy of a historical document. So when you read the history of the Peloponnesian Wars, and they give facts and dates, to evaluate how factual it is, you're engaging in higher criticism. So the technical term for the evaluation of the Bible is called biblical higher criticism. But for short, we use higher criticism, and the people who are skeptics of the Bible commonly refer to as higher critics. Now, why do they say that the stories in the Bible are not true or factual? Underlying their method of higher criticism is they're using the philosophy of rationalism. And rationalism was a philosophy that was developed in the 1600s. And the main proponents, 1600s, of rationalism were René Descartes, Thomas Hobbes, and John Locke. And René Descartes, he's the one who said, "I think, therefore I am." I don't exactly know what that means. But that's a famous phrase. It's known as the Age of Reason, 1600s. Before that, it was the Age of Faith. Part of the reason why they're using in rationalism, the main theme of rationalism is you can determine what is true and what is false purely by the use of reason. What makes sense in a logical sense. So the fatal flaw, what is the fatal flaw of rationalism? And it's in the Bible. To evaluate the Bible using rationalism, the fatal flaw is clearly outlined in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14, which says, "The natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto them, neither can he know them." So you're evaluating a spiritual book through human reasoning. Ideas have consequences, and false ideas endure long. Appropriately, Charles Darwin said that. Okay, and it applies to his theories. False ideas endure long. So ideas have consequences, and one of the consequences was Immanuel Kant was another rationalist. He wrote a treatise called The Critique of Pure Reason, and in essence he said that reason is superior to determining the truth, what is reality. Albert Einstein, when he was 15 years old in 1895, read that book. Previously, Einstein would go to this Jewish synagogue, and he would read the Torah, and he was a believer in the Torah, the Jewish Bible. And so after he read Immanuel Kant, he put away his Bible. He doesn't believe that Einstein never believed the Bible, and from then on he thought that they were all children's stories, because Immanuel Kant told him that so, through the use of reasoning. So when does this idea of higher criticism, disparaging the Bible, the facts of the Bible come into play? Well, it came into play 1845. And that was also the beginnings of liberal theology. It started with disparaging historical facts. Now, when they first started disparaging the historical facts, saying it's not true, they didn't say that the Bible is not true. They said that these were just metaphors. The flood and all that. It's symbolic of other things. And then it gradually evolved into totally disavowing the Bible. Came to its fruition around 1960. So anyway, and by the way, did I tell you that they started in the German universities? This started in the University of Germany. And by the way, did you know that where it started in these German universities, they were Bible colleges? Yeah, they weren't secular. They were Bible professors who taught them. And this is it's emblematic of today, where they're disparaging the others. Say there's no facts. There's no facts about the Bible. It's just there's no evidence, And so, and I'm here to prove otherwise. There's a suppression of the truth. There's a suppression of the evidence, and I can prove it right now at a simple demonstration. Here's a statement. Here's a statement by Charles Darwin that's quoted in books of today, on the TV programs. And if you can't read it, let me read it for you. There's a grandeur in this life, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed laws of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. It's a classic statement of Charles Darwin. Well, guess what? He never said that. This is quoted by Stephen Jay Gould. The late Stephen Jay Gould passed away about 10 years ago or more. He was a leading evolutionist in the United States, and he quoted Darwin in one of his books. Stephen Jay Gould would go around, of course he proclaimed evolution as a fact, but he went around saying Christians who believe the Bible, that God created, human life, are yahoos. He went all over the United States saying that a dumb person. Here's what Darwin really said. There is a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms, or into one, and that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed laws of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. Darwin believed that God initially created a simple single-celled organism, or several single-celled simple organisms. This is cut out. This is being cut out on Darwin's book that was published in 1859, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, which, by the way, when it came out in London in 1859, the first day sold 100,000 copies. was the biggest seller in English history. But Darwin was never an atheist. Darwin believed that God created a single cell, and then he stepped back. And then evolution is random. God took a vacation. He stepped back, and then all this happened randomly. But he said God initially set the process in motion. But you see, this example here I'm giving you is censorship.
Yeah.
They're censoring what Darwin really believed in. And did you know that Darwin was never a trained scientist?
No.
People think that he was a biologist. No. Darwin had a 3-year seminary degree. Darwin was qualified to be an Anglican minister. But he went 6 years on the Beagle, so he didn't go into the ministry. His father encouraged him to go into the ministry. Well, why would Darwin go into the ministry? Because when he didn't believe in the Genesis account, Darwin would be considered a deist. God created the amoeba, then he stepped back. The more proper way to interpret Darwin is Darwin sent God an eviction notice. So anyway, so his father encouraged Darwin to take up, he originally wanted to be a doctor, but he couldn't, they didn't have anesthesia in those days, so when they cut open people would scream. So Darwin couldn't stand that. So he dropped out of medical school, and then he went to 3 years of seminary, King's College in Cambridge, to become an Anglican minister. His father encouraged him to do that, because his father said, you don't have to believe a word of the Bible. He said, you could do that because, a country pastor in those days would be an easy job. You just visit people. There was plenty of time for free time. Darwin came from a wealthy family. His father was a doctor, and by today's standards, his father's worth $3 million, which was a lot in those days. Darwin had a lot of free time. So his father says, do that so you can study nature. Darwin was interested in studying nature. So he went, did you know when he spent 6 years on the Beagle, by today's standards, his father paid for it all. By today's standards, his father paid $500,000 for those 6 years. So anyway, but did you know, and this is also suppressed in the mass media in our college, did you know when Darwin sent crates back of his, mostly beetles and small animals, in his theories of evolution, while he was formulated, did you know that 60% of those classifications that he sent back to the Natural History Museum in London were misclassified?
Oh, wow.
So Darwin got more than half of his animals wrong. And Adam Sedgwick was the curator of the London Museum at the time. He was a trained biologist, had a degree in biology, and he said they're all wrong. They're all wrong. And Adam Sedgwick was familiar with Darwin's theories of evolution, and he says he examined the animals, the structure of the animals, and he objected. And other biologists at the time objected, said it's too complicated for it to have occurred naturally. That's kind of suppressed. It's kind of convenient to leave out.
Yeah.
So that's the story. So the big thing is they tell us that the Bible stories are not true, and especially more than anything else, they tell us that the most dramatic story of ever was, Moses and the Exodus is false. So I'm here on what better story, the most dramatic story in the Bible, Moses and the Exodus. That probably has the most proof. The most dramatic story in the Bible actually has the most proof there is. And if you would eliminate the Exodus story just from the archaeological evidence and from the writings, you can reconstruct the book of Exodus, the main points. And, okay, when they say that there's no evidence, they're overlooking a lot of stuff. And one of the major stuff that they're overlooking is, have you heard of what's called the Brooklyn Papyrus? It's in the Brooklyn Museum in New York City for the whole world to see. And what is the Brooklyn Papyrus? The Brooklyn Papyrus is the earliest Egyptian record of Hebrew slaves, it's right on the screen now, prior to the Exodus. You've got to go by the specific fragment number because there's a lot of papyruses that are called Brooklyn papyruses. Papyruses tend to be, the paper is brittle, and they tend to break off, so that's what they're called fragments. And so the subject matter of the fragments is given a classification number. So you got to go by Brooklyn fragment 35:1446. That is the earliest record of of Hebrew slaves in Egypt. For example, there's called the Brooklyn Medical Papyrus. That's the oldest preserved Egyptian writing pertaining to medicine. That dates to 450 BC. So these are called Brooklyn Papyruses because they are in the Brooklyn Museum. Okay, the Brooklyn Papyrus was purchased in 1889 in the Egyptian antiquities market in the city of Memphis, Egypt, which is the southern part of Egypt. I always think of Memphis as Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, Egypt. It was purchased by the American Egyptologist Charles Wilbur, and it was later donated to the British Museum in the early 1930s by his daughter Theodora Wilbur. Okay, now where did the Brooklyn Papyrus come from? It's thought to have originated in or near the city of Thebes, which at the time was the capital of Upper Egypt. At the time that it was written, which Upper Egypt is considered the southern part of Egypt. They call it Upper and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt is in the south because it's a higher elevation. Lower Egypt is in the north because the Nile runs downhill. It's confusing. It's thought to have originated in or around the city of Thebes, based on the fact several references are made to that city in the document itself. Okay, what is the date and contents? This papyrus is a list of a register of slaves to be transferred from one household or estate to another household or estate in the city of Thebes. They had plantations in Egypt at the time the Jews were slaves, and even before that, they had other people that they conquered from the Middle East who were slaves. They had big plantations. A lot of these plantations were in the south of Egypt, and they grew grapes. And just like in the slaves we had today in the Civil War era, they had plantations. And there's another document. I'm giving you the major features, the major archaeological evidences. There's another document that I read where there's a rich lady at that time who owned slaves, and she's transferring the slaves to another plantation. And how do we know that this is before the period of the Exodus? Well, we know this because it contains a royal decree by Pharaoh Sobek-Hotep III transferring ownership. In those days, if you want to transfer ownership from one plantation to another, you need the Pharaoh's permission. Actually have like a stamp on the document. And how do we know exactly that this is before the Exodus? Because modern scholarship places Mr. Hotep III, he reigned between 1453 and 1540 BC, which places this list before the time of the Exodus. Okay, now this date isn't significant because the Bible gives the time of the Exodus. According to 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 6, it says, during the 4th year of King Solomon's reign, 108 years after the Exodus, it says there, Solomon began construction of the temple at Jerusalem. Okay, the 4th year of modern biblical scholarship places the 4th year of Solomon's reign at 966 BC. Accordingly, if you add 480 years prior to this, the date is 1446 BC for the Exodus. That's how we know. There's other reasons why we know that it's an ancient document for the Exodus is because the names of the pharaohs on these documents. We know the time. Modern scholarship from the 1990s on a great deal has learned about Egyptian history. We know pretty much accuracy. There's some little doubt, but pretty much so, the reigns of the pharaohs. And so-called this pharaoh is in the 13th dynasty, and that's about 40 to 50 years before the Exodus. Another reason why we know is language has changed over the years. Same thing in ancient Egypt. Language has changed. Just like in the 70s, we used the word cool for meaning it's neat. So we know, we see the right, we know that, And so language has changed in ancient Egypt throughout the centuries. And ancient language experts study it all the time. And so they could get a pretty good fix on when these documents were written. And also radiocarbon 14 dating can pretty much place a roundabout figure of that as well. So you have all these factors. Okay, what does this list contain? It contains a list of 95 domestic servants. Most of them are specified as Asiatic or coming from Western Asia, otherwise known as Canaan. We think of Asiatic today as coming from China, the Orient, but ancient Egypt, the countries to the east of ancient Egypt, which is the nearest was Canaan or Israel, they were referred to as Asiatics. Although in ancient Egypt they were aware of Chinese people. The majority of them are females because women usually worked inside the homes, whereas men worked outside in the fields. As I mentioned before, they had grape fields in the southern part of Egypt. Okay, let's go further in this. 29 of the servants have names that have been Egyptianized, but can be traced back to the Semitic or Hebrew language. More to the point, 10 of them have direct Jewish or Hebrew names. A few examples. There's a female lady named Ashura, A-S-H-E-R-A. That's the feminine form of the male name Asher, the name of one of the sons of Jacob. And there's one Shiphrah, it's S-H-I-P-H-R-A-H. The same name of one of the Hebrew midwives prior to the Exodus. I gotta look page. And the other one is, I think it's a pretty obvious name, is Mehahema, M-E-N-A-H-E-M-A. That's the feminine form of Menahem, like Menahem Bacon, the Israeli Prime Minister. He's one of the characters mentioned in 2 Kings. And so basically the Brooklyn Papyrus 35:1445 is considered to be the clearest and earliest record of Hebrew names and presence in Egypt, just as the Bible said. Now, I'm not aware of any higher critics objecting to that. They're silent on that. Because if they object, they're going to have some problems. They're a lot silent on that. So let's move on to the next topic. Let's get more specific here.